The Laken Riley case. Hecklers shout down Athens mayor as he denies sanctuary city and announces public safety funds. I don't know if you guys saw this video, but it's absolutely wild. This dude, I should pull it up on Twitter because this dude is just evil. He blames Trump. He lies about Trump. That's the craziest thing. I don't know if I have this this video. I'll try and find it. I think Jack Posobiec had it. I had the story. Let me see if I can.
The district attorney in this county has already come out and said, well, we have to make sure this does not become political, which I agree in the sense that we want to make sure that, you know, the justice system is carried out in a way that isn't easily overturned, that there's a fair trial, but it is inherently political because of who is involved in this case.
Well, it's inherently
right?
political because this Democrat wants to make it. Check this out. Check this video out.
Humanity is the expectation of human dignity.
Human dignity for a criminal alien who presumably was trying to rape a young woman. And when she fought back, he decided to murder her by crushing and disfiguring her skull. That's what happened.
While 2019 was not that long ago, you might remember the dynamic we were living in the late teens in this country, where you had the President of the United States speaking in the most vile terms about people who were foreign born.
Oh, I get it. Donald Trump said rapists and murderers are animals. And so that's why this criminal alien decided to try to rape a young woman and then brutally murder her. Makes sense. Or actually what makes sense is Trump was right.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Wild.
And you had that notion metastasizing in places like Charlottesville.
Charlottesville. You hear that? Charlottesville.
When I was younger, I was a criminal. And you know what I thought about doing? Crossing the border to Mexico to get away from my crimes.
Son, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Jesus Christ, he saved.
This guy's a Democrat. These people are evil. I'm sorry. We're talking about a young woman who went for a jog, never came home. Her friends got scared. She didn't come back. They called the police. They find her corpse. Surveillance footage. It turns out, I should say, it is reported to be a 26-year-old Venezuelan criminal alien, presumably was trying to rape her. She fought back, so he murdered her. And this is what you get from leadership in these Democrat-controlled areas. It's Trump's fault.
After the DA is like, but don't make it political. The mayor the next day is like, it is in fact political.
Yeah, but it's not just Democrat-controlled areas. So one of the supporters of my campaign, he's an angel dad. His name is Dan Golvak. And back in 2015, his son was killed by a 5-time deported illegal alien. Yeah. You know, and what really bothers me is we have this invasion at our southern border, you know, and my opponent decided back in November that he didn't want to show up on a resolution to vote to impeach Mayorkas after he's been calling for the impeachment of Mayorkas for over a year.
Crenshaw didn't show up.
He didn't show up. That was to vote on a resolution.
Why?
Now, that's a great question. Why wasn't he there to represent his constituents? Now, ultimately, for the actual vote to impeach Mayorkas, he did show up. But my question is, why didn't he vote to show up for the resolution, or why didn't he show up to vote on the resolution? Because here's what could have happened. Luckily, this didn't happen. But what could have happened was that there were not enough votes to push that resolution through to take it to the next step. Well, then what then? You know, what are we in Texas supposed to do whenever we don't have our representative that just talks about how much he supposedly fights for the border to close the border, but yet he's not actually showing up to vote on a resolution?
And he never said where he was?
No, not that I'm aware of.
That's wild. Because I remember he missed a couple votes earlier in the year, but then he was like, I'm on paternity leave. I just had a kid. Like, there are times, or Steve Scalise came back and was, when they voted a second time on the impeachment, obviously he had been going through chemo. Like, okay, fine, you weren't there when you needed to be. But it is interesting that you wouldn't address an issue that pertains to your state so intensely. I mean, especially when it comes to these tragic cases of young people, like the person I came with, who are killed by people who were deported, came back. It's completely preventable crime. I mean, I think about Molly Tibbetts, who the student at University of Iowa, who disappeared while jogging. 5 weeks later, was found dead in a cornfield, and her murderer was an illegal immigrant who's incarcerated in the U.S. now. And her dad was like, "Well, don't give in to Trump talking about people being bad who are from other countries." And you want to be like, "Sir, yeah, your daughter didn't have to die, but at the hands of this person. This person in particular." the federal government failed you. They could have prevented them entering the country.
Now, here's what's
didn't.
scary. Let's talk about weak Republican quote unquote leadership for a second. Here's what's scary is that you have Republican governors like mine that thinks it's a good idea to then bust these criminals further into the country that they invaded in the first place. You know, they're just going to be harvested for Democrat votes. But somehow it's a good idea that we just catch them, we release them. In some instances, we're actually using Texas taxpayer dollars to then bust these illegals further into the country that they invaded. And then we wonder why stuff like this happens.
It's worse than Democrat votes. They create whole congressional seats, and there is no voting those people out. When California brings in non-citizens, the census then gives them an extra seat in Congress. You cannot vote that person out. Republicans do not exist to vote them out. Their constituency is comprised of non-citizens, an extra seat in Congress. Now, if it was just illegal immigrants voting, you could arguably vote against them at least. When they create fake electoral votes and fake congressional seats, nothing you can do about it. Unless there's like some kind of amendment. Trump tried to do it with the citizenship question on the census, and they blocked him from doing it. Even the Supreme Court did. That's just it, man. You know, I'm going to throw it to Bernie Sanders, who said in 2015, if you have open borders, your country will become poorer. Shout out, old Bernie, I guess. That was a while ago. Now we're here. You know, when I told the story earlier on my morning show, when I was living in Florida, in Miami, just outside of Miami in the Redlands near Homestead, we had this incident occur where neighbors were warning everybody about home invaders. And they said, hey, be careful, heads up. Here's what happened. The story they told us was a guy was in his house, taking a shower on the second floor of his house. When he got out of the shower, he heard rustling and something going on. Walks down the stairs in his towel. Two guys robbing his house. One guy shoots him in the chest, kills him. They loot the stuff, they leave. The guys eventually got caught. Guess what? Criminal aliens. They did not care. They were here to loot and steal. And so I hear a story like that, and I'm like, it makes a lot of sense to me why people who live out here are pro-gun and anti-illegal immigrant. And, you know, I tried telling these stories. I told the story to a friend of mine who was like a crazy liberal. I don't think it matters, though, because unless you're going to spend time, like I have friends who are like city urban liberal types who are, let's just call them cultist urban liberal types these days. And that's cult. And they are default liberal. They don't pay attention to politics all that much, but they believe these things. If I'm around them, it moderates them. I remember sitting in my friend's kitchen with two of her friends, and we had a very calm, reasonable discussion where I explained a bunch of things. They went, oh, I didn't know that. And they were saying things like, you really think Trump supporters are concerned about immigration because of like economics? No, it's because they hate brown people. And I'm like, that's like a dramatic oversimplification. And it sounds like you've never actually talked to any of these people what they think. And they're like, okay, well, fair point. I didn't. So I can explain this stuff to them. But my one friend said this to me. There is literally no reason to have a gun. And I was like, there's no reason. And she's like, there's literally no reason. And I said, okay, let me tell you a story. And I told that story of the home invasion. And I'm like, what should I do? Like, well, you call the police if someone's going to break in your house. I'm like, in a rural area? The cops were an hour away. There's no police stations. I'm surrounded by 20 miles of farmland. If I call the police, they'll show up in an hour, maybe 3. What should I do? And it's like, well, I don't know. We had something happen in Miami where we were hanging out in the kitchen making pizza. We would buy the ingredients and make weird pizzas and make whatever we wanted. When all of a sudden, it's a 5-acre property, so it's long. It's a narrow property. I see a flashlight deep in our yard. All I had was an air break action air rifle, pellet gun. It was like a 22 or something. So I just broke the barrel and dry fired it, screamed, and they ran off, jumped the fence, and they got out. I regret not actually having a real firearm, but I wouldn't want to, warning shot a real firearm in an area like that. But that dry fire scared him off. And I said, look, I didn't even have a gun, but what if that person shot at me, shot back? What if they broke into my house? What should I do? Well, she said, you don't need a gun. I said, should I die?
What came to mind whenever you were just telling that story was, y'all seen the movie Aliens, right? So,
the second one?
Yeah. So there's a point in the movie where they have to collect all of the ammunition because they're right next to a nuclear reactor and they didn't want them to fire. And this is right whenever they're coming up on the hive of xenomorphs. Sorry, I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to sci-fi. So anyways, I forget what the guy's name was. He's like, what the hell are we supposed to use, man? Harsh language? And that's kind of what that reminded me of. And honestly, the imagery is really there's a lot of parallelization. Is that even a word? But there's a lot of parallel there. You know, and when it comes to the Second Amendment, I always think it's funny when people say you don't need guns, not only for that reason, but the Second Amendment places a restriction on the government, not the citizen. You know, I'm a Second Amendment purist, which means that any weapon, any firearm that our own military is able to have, then we by default also...
Nuclear weapons. I say yes.
Yeah, I mean,
biological weapons.
I haven't really thought about. I haven't really thought about that. But I mean, there's a great conversation there. But I mean,
we have never amended the Constitution to restrict the ability of the private citizen to own nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and that's why private entities build nuclear weapons.
But what's funny is that, so Biden was like, you know, you don't have F-15s, we have F-15s, and I'm like, well, we should be able to have an F. I think about Tom Cruise whenever he bought all those F-18s for Maverick. You know, I was like, I want an F-18. But in principle, yes.
Well, I mean, private companies own these things. Private companies have warships. Private companies have nuclear bombs.
Good point.
And that it's always been the case that private entities are allowed to do it. You can get it when you're filling out your FFL forms. They ask you or I don't know which form, but you can fill out a form for the government that you're building a nuclear weapon. You got to go through the legal process to certify or whatever you got to do. Good luck as like an individual trying to build a nuclear weapon.
I don't think I'm smart enough for that, but
but see, this is the thing about our Constitution. It's toilet paper. It's a brilliant document written by brilliant people with excellent ideas for creating the greatest government, and it is treated by the people in government like it's a piece of toilet paper.
Well, it's definitely soaked in piss right now. I mean, so there's actually a phrase in the Declaration of Independence that says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, right? So we elect men, and women, but we elect people to go and represent us in the government. Deriving their just powers, and I always laugh at just powers, but from who? The consent of the governed. You know, I've always said that if we lose our country, it won't be because of corruption in the government, it'll be because of complacency in the electorate. And
that's
so
where we are.
You know, exactly. But you know, this problem that we have right now, it's not really as complicated as people make it out to be. If the people would wake up, if the people would do their duty, if the people would stop focusing inward and start focusing outward, then we can start to right this ship. And so, you know.
Well, I think the problem is you look at the amount of criminal aliens pouring into this country, their interests are not aligned. There was a Venezuelan influencer calling for people in Venezuela and the diaspora, whatever you want to call it, to support the Times Square shooter. They don't care about Americans. They care about each other.
What do you think about, was it called the replacement theory?
Replacement theory?
Yeah. What do you think about that?
It depends on how you define what replacement theory is. If you say replacement theory, the media will immediately claim you're talking about, you know, a bunch of Jews that want to get rid of white people or something. But if you look at the actual political practice of Democrats, which they've stated publicly, like Van Jones, they want the white majority to become a minority. And that will fundamentally change the way politics in this country happens. So they say they're doing it. So there you go. Joe Biden is keeping the border open. CBP is facilitating child sex trafficking. That's a fact now. Dr. Phil did that interview, went on The View and talked about it, confirmed by the head of the CBP union. CBP is helping to facilitate child sex trafficking.
Oh, 100%.
And we knew it was the CBP agents doing it. And here we are. Thanks, Joe Biden. And this fascinating thing is, I would if I was governor or AG in West Virginia, I would be going to a judge, getting a warrant for a raid on the 340 CBP facility. I'll say it a million times. There should be armed, fully armored state law enforcement storming those gates, detaining people and ripping through those servers to figure out what's going on. They should get a warrant to do it. But it seems like, especially after Dr. Phil, I mean, we knew they were doing this already. Then Dr. Phil goes down and he asks about these kids coming through the border being trafficked. And the head of CBP union says it is happening. It's absolute. Okay, well, that's certainly probable cause, right? I'd like to know who in CBP is communicating, knowing they're facilitating child sex trafficking. I'd like to put them in prison. Now, why isn't any Republican state doing anything about it? Conservatives just are like, I don't blame the child trafficker CBP agent. I blame Joe Biden. And I'm like, oh, I blame the human trafficker. Joe Biden's bad too.
So we got a bunch of nutless Republicans in office. You know, the only way that we're gonna fix this is we need, first and foremost, a moratorium on immigration. We've got to get this problem under control. We've got to do mass deportation. We need to end catch and release. It needs to be catch and deport. And once they're deported, they get a warning stating that if we catch you again, then your eligibility to be able to apply for citizenship is gone. We need to lock down the ports of entry and have boots on the ground actively repelling the invasion. But, whenever you got at the port of entry, whenever you have people not even going through the ports of entry, whenever they can just go a mile or two down the road, and, and we have Border Patrol literally helping them over, they're cutting the razor wire. They're helping them over the box cars,
giving them rides.
Yeah. It's absolutely crazy.
Look, if you put me in charge of any one of these states, not that I'll ever run for that, I would be locking these people up. If I was governor or AG in Texas, I'd be doing everything in my power to go down and put those guys in cuffs. CBP agents on their knees with their hands on their heads, whimpering like little bitches as I lock them up for human trafficking, because there's no excuse that your boss told you to do it, so you facilitated child sex trafficking, you fucking scumbags. I'm sick of conservatives who are like, I'm not going to blame the law enforcement officer. Biden made him do it. Oh, Biden made CBP traffic children to sex rings. Sure, I guess.
By the way,
but like when you go after the boss, you arrest his henchmen too.
When they
agreed,
this Dr. Phil thing I haven't followed up. I know that he's been doing rounds on talk shows, but like, what was he told?
He went to the head of the CBP union on the border and he said, I'm paraphrasing, what are the possibilities that these kids that are coming through, that you are bringing them into, you're putting them into the hands of these trafficking rings, these sex trafficking rings? And he goes, absolutely, it's happening. It's absolutely happening. And he goes, you're saying our tax dollars are going towards putting children into sex trafficking rings? He goes, yes.
Is that all on video?
Yes. And then he went on Rogan and said it, and then he went on The View and said it.
So who's the CBP guy that's
the head of the union? So this is not like leadership necessarily. It's a guy who's basically saying, this is what they're telling our guys to do. And I'm like, thank you for the confession. I would like to now have all those people arrested. Best we can do, I guess, is Abbott saying we'll send out National Guard to push them away. That's wild, dude. There's videos of these cartel guys with rifles wading through the Rio, trafficking these kids in, and these CBP agents go, great job, trafficker. I'll take it from here. And everyone's just like, this is fine. It's absolutely wild. I hope and I pray, and I will do everything in my power, and I hope every CBP agent hears this, that if Donald Trump wins, I will beg on my knees, banging on the door of anyone who will listen, that you are put in prison. We will have every legal apparatus to track you down and get warrants for your arrest. I don't care if your boss told you to open the gate and let him in. Someone let that 26-year-old guy in 2 years ago, and he tried to rape and then he murdered that 22-year-old. There's a CBP agent out there who knows he did it. And I want to see him crying as he's ripped away from his family and locked up for the rest of his life. Human smugglers get no sympathy from me. I don't care if they're wearing a badge.
Come on.
What can you say? Not everyone involved in that organization is necessarily guilty, but they're not above the law.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, look.
But I happen to believe too that if you have a voice, and for one reason or another you choose not to use it, then you're just as guilty.
What would happen? Let me ask you a question. Like, what would happen? Anybody can answer, not just. Let's say you work at a restaurant, just a regular restaurant. And you get some good old boys hustling through the back, shuffling around some cocaine. And, big fat Tony walks in and goes, hey, you're a good bartender here. Don't say nothing. You didn't see nothing. He stuffed some cash in your pocket. Do you think when the police raid that place, they're going to say, don't worry, you weren't involved? Or do you think they're going to crack you in the face with a truncheon, throw you on the ground, cuff you, and say, talk?
Well, let's ask all the January 6th people who have been arrested for just being near the Capitol.
Yeah,
now,
there you go.
To be fair, like a CBP agent working in West Virginia, I don't think they're involved. However, I do think it's hilarious that they're willing to accept money from an organization that is now publicly known to be trafficking children to sex rings. So I have very little, I have a tremendous amount of disdain for these people. But in the event, I want to make sure it's very clear. I would love to see, like, I don't know, Kash Patel become, like, you know, Attorney General or something. And then I will just formally petition these people and say, there's probably a couple hundred guys in the CBP who knowingly transported children into child sex trafficking rings. Let's put them in prison for the rest of their lives. Let's put their faces on TV. Let's film the perp walk. That's what I'm talking about. Some guy working a desk or working the border and taking your passport. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about these guys who were told by the Biden administration, by Mayorkas or whoever, by their boss, go down to the southern border in Texas, open up the gates, let them in. If they're trafficking children, you're going to take them and their kids, and you're going to get them in a vehicle. You're going to transport them to their flight. You're going to transport them to the NGO, who's going to give them their $3,000 debit card to send those kids into sex slavery. Yeah, those guys have to go to prison. Each and every one of them. I got to be honest. I don't see any Republicans having the balls to ever do anything like that. Never. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.